I'm one of the early recording engineers at the RCA Studios, which began their operations in the Royal York Hotel in Toronto in 1941. These were the old studios that the CPR used for their early broadcasts. The studios were available, and they had vacated them, and RCA at that time found them useful for their purposes of doing recordings for, it wasn't television, but radio in those days. And they proceeded to involve artists and musicians and so forth to produce material for radio. And as I said, in the case of advertising, it's spot announcements for music and that sort of thing. The orchestras would come up and do recordings. But when I was involved, it was more of the commercial recording for radio announcements. And in that case, we were recording announcers who would produce and announce the material provided by the agencies to cover the material that was required to advertise. In doing that, the process was that the announcer would be in the studio, the engineer would be in the control room, which I was part of, and we would then take the position of timing the start and beginning and so forth to keep it under control. That meant that once the announcer was ready to go, we would signal to the man running the disc recorder. In those days, it was not tape, but disc recording, and which was called a Scully lathe. And he would say that he has a machine ready to go, and we would signal the announcer to start talking. So he would give his script, and if he was successful, he'd get through the 1 minute completely. But if he made a mistake, we had to stop. And in that case, we were able to keep anything in the way of recorded material because it wasn't able to be put together in those days. So we had to go from the beginning to the end again. And each time we made a mistake, the Scully lathe man would have to X out the cuts that he had made so that it wouldn't be used again. So we had a collection then of good takes on a disc. These discs then were re-recorded, played back to another disc, which was then complete and in good shape to be made into a pressing. And the pressings would have this material on it, and we sent to the radio stations with instructions to play it at their particular time. So those were the advertising advantages there. Beyond that, there wasn't an awful lot that I got involved with because I must say that I did my job, but unfortunately I got a little bit distracted in the early 70s by being involved with Canadian figure skating. Because of that, I had a son who was skating, and he was a dancer, and he was progressing through the stages, and a dancer needs music. And I got involved listening to the music that was reproduced in the skating rinks. And it just distorted my whole idea of what was going on. And I felt that I had an opportunity to make some improvements in that field, which I did after having learned an awful lot about in the recording end of it, that we could make a great deal of improvements for the reproduction of sound and voice in the rinks. A lot of the problems in skating was that the programs were very restricted in timing, and they were a length of time that had to be completed with the program so that it was within the contest specifications. We found that timing was the baddest part, the worst part, and the system of recording in those days and producing music for skaters was done mostly by coaches. And the use of the cassette machine was involved. And the cassette machine was very early used, and it wasn't a very perfect machine as far as timing was concerned. In the later days, cassette machines and videotape machines and tape machines were all required to be run at a certain speed. Well, the early cassette machines didn't. And because they weren't, the purchaser of the machine was more or less required to record on it and play back on it at the same time, or at a different time. So it didn't matter whether the tape was running fast or slow. But when we started taking these tapes and playing on other machines, we found the time differences were so bad that it wasn't satisfactory to be used as a device in skating. So I found myself involved in trying to prevent or correct this. And after a long time of experimenting and so forth, we evolved standardization situations with standard tapes and made them look out so that the machine was running at the right speed. And we eventually corrected a lot of these times for the competition point of view. The worst part was that we used to have to stay up all night and re-record all these kids skating and make new tapes of the darn things. So in that sense, it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of interesting thing to bring the whole process into fruition and become a viable situation. That ended in 1995 for me. I had done a lot of playing music and sound systems for competitions which are rated across Canada. The Canadian Championships, I did all of them for every day for a whole 5 to 10 years. And I got involved with Olympics. I did 2 Olympic programs, and I did 5 World Championship skating programs. So that gives a little bit of background on the music end of things. I went back to the recording very slightly, but I wasn't interested in as much as I was the figure skating end of things. So that ended around 1995.